From its inception in the early 1930s to its abrupt collapse in 1945, the girls' youth movement within Nazi Germany represented one of the most meticulously engineered social projects of the era, designed to reshape the identity, purpose, and worldview of an entire generation of young girls. Emerging at a time of political upheaval, economic instability, and widespread yearning for national renewal, the organization became a central pillar of the regime's vision for the future, an instrument not only of indoctrination, but of cultural transformation. It sought to cultivate a new ideal of German girlhood that fused obedience, physical vigor, community responsibility, and unwavering loyalty into a single highly specific model of womanhood aligned with state ideology. At its core, the movement promised belonging, discipline, and purpose, offering structured activities, social networks, and a sense of unity at a moment when traditional social structures were fraying. But beneath its surface of camaraderie and national pride lay a deeper, more systematic agenda: the shaping of youth into tools of the state, conditioned from childhood to internalize, reproduce, and defend its worldview. Unlike many contemporary youth organizations, which emphasized personal growth or civic engagement, this one had an explicitly ideological goal: to mold girls into future mothers, workers, caregivers, and supporters of the national vision, while instilling attitudes that would guide their beliefs well into adulthood. Through uniforms, rituals, songs, and carefully curated events, the organization fostered a collective identity that diminished individuality in favor of unity and purpose. The movement's leaders understood that the most effective way to build a loyal nation was to begin with its youth, and girls, though excluded from combat roles, were seen as essential to the future stability and expansion of the nation's cultural and ideological foundations. Central to this mission was the belief that girlhood was not merely a transitional stage, but a formative period during which identity could be shaped with precision. The organization was structured to reach girls at a young age, gradually leading them through tiers of responsibility and ideological reinforcement that paralleled their physical and emotional development. Through education programs, outdoor activities, community service, and structured training, girls learned not only practical skills but also the values deemed essential to the state's vision of a socially and ideologically unified society. Every activity, from group exercises to folk dancing, from hygiene lessons to first aid training, was linked to broader state objectives, weaving ideology seamlessly into everyday life. The result was a system in which political messaging was not delivered as propaganda, but absorbed as part of normal life. Leaders paid careful attention to the emotional needs of young girls, using the promise of friendship, belonging, and recognition to bind them more tightly to the movement. The emotional bonds created within these groups often had lifelong effects, shaping how former members later reflected on their participation. Many remembered the sense of community with fondness, even as they acknowledged the manipulative intentions behind it. This complexity, where genuine friendships coexisted with ideological conditioning, makes the history of the movement both deeply human and deeply troubling. Education played an especially powerful role in reinforcing ideological goals. The movement worked closely with schools to ensure that lessons taught during the day were echoed in after-school gatherings, weekend activities, and holiday camps. Girls were taught to understand themselves as part of a larger national story, one that emphasized purity, sacrifice, duty, and the importance of preserving cultural heritage. Lessons on history, race, and community responsibility were tailored to shape perceptions from an early age, framing loyalty not as a choice, but as a natural expectation. Physical fitness programs further reinforced this worldview by linking health, discipline, and readiness to broader national goals. Girls trained in marching, athletics, hiking, and endurance exercises not for personal empowerment, but to prepare them for roles as strong, capable supporters of the nation's future. These programs instilled a sense of pride and achievement, yet they also served a dual purpose. They prepared girls for labor, motherhood, and service roles that would become essential to the wartime state. As the nation moved into war, the expectations placed upon young girls expanded dramatically. Mobilization efforts transformed the organization from a youth movement into an essential component of wartime infrastructure. Girls were called upon to fill labor shortages, serve in medical support roles, assist in emergency response efforts, and contribute to agriculture, industry, and administration. Wartime propaganda emphasized that victory depended not only on soldiers at the front, but on the dedication of those at home, including the youngest members of society. Their responsibilities grew heavier, their tasks more demanding, and their everyday lives increasingly shaped by the pressures of war. Many experienced trauma, fatigue, and emotional strain while continuing to serve with the discipline instilled through years of training. Their roles during this period revealed the extent to which the state relied on its youth, not merely for ideological support, but for practical survival. The collapse of the organization in 1945 brought an abrupt end to this carefully structured world. As defeat became inevitable, schedules dissolved, communication broke down, and responsibilities shifted from organized service to improvised survival. Girls experienced displacement, hunger, uncertainty, and the emotional turmoil of watching their communities crumble. Many shed their uniforms to avoid suspicion, while others struggled to reconcile the ideals they had once embraced with the devastation surrounding them. After the war, the movement's legacy became a complex and contested topic. Some former members reflected with nostalgia on the friendships, structure, and sense of belonging they had once found. Others confronted the painful realization that they had been manipulated from childhood into supporting ideals they later rejected. The denazification process forced society to grapple with questions of responsibility, innocence, and influence. Girls who had joined at a young age faced the challenge of rebuilding their identities in a world where their past involvement carried stigma, yet had shaped much of who they had become. The League of German Girls, known in German as the Bund Deutscher Mädel, BDM, did not emerge spontaneously in 1933 with Hitler's rise to power. Its roots ran deeper, stretching back into a turbulent era of cultural shifts, gender anxieties, youth activism, and nationalist revival movements that shaped the German psyche during the early 20th century. To understand why the Nazi regime invested so heavily in forming an organization specifically for young girls, we must first understand the ideological landscape and social transformations that predated it. The origins of the BDM lay at the intersection of political ambition, demographic fears, and a desire to engineer a new type of German woman, one loyal to the Führer, committed to the racial ideals of the Reich, and prepared to fulfill her biological mission for the nation. After the First World War, Germany faced humiliation, poverty, and national trauma. Millions struggled with unemployment, food shortages, and the emotional burden of a lost war. The Treaty of Versailles had not only weakened the nation militarily, but also shattered its sense of identity. As Germans searched for renewal, nationalist groups, paramilitary youth movements, and ideological associations rapidly emerged. Among them were organizations dedicated to shaping the character and identity of the next generation. While boys entered groups that celebrated military discipline and physical toughness, girls were drawn to associations that emphasized morality, simplicity, motherhood, and service to the community. These pre-existing societies created a fertile ground in which the Nazi Party could later plant its own unified vision of youth education. The Nazis understood early that the future of their ideology depended on complete control of the youth. For boys, this meant preparing future soldiers. For girls, the mission was even more strategic, to shape the bearers of the next generation. Hitler often proclaimed that the strength of the nation rested not only on the battlefield, but also in the cradle. The demographic decline that Germany experienced after the First World War alarmed Nazi leaders. They believed the nation's survival would depend on women producing large families of racially pure children. This urgency formed the foundation on which the BDM was built. Before the BDM became the official youth organization for girls, there were multiple smaller nationalist groups, including the Deutscher Mädel and the later disbanded Jungmadel organizations. These societies blended Völkisch values, outdoor activities, and loyalty to the German race with a romanticized vision of womanhood. Their members proudly rejected the growing urban modernity and the influence of American fashion, jazz culture, and feminist movements. Instead, they promoted rural ideals, traditional clothing, and the belief that a woman's highest destiny lay in family and service to the community. These pre-existing societies created a fertile ground in which the Nazi Party could later plant its own unified vision of youth education. The Nazis understood early that the future of their ideology depended on complete control of the youth. For boys, this meant preparing future soldiers. For girls, the mission was even more strategic, to shape the bearers of the next generation. Hitler often proclaimed that the strength of the nation rested not only on the battlefield, but also in the cradle. The demographic decline that Germany experienced after the First World War alarmed Nazi leaders. They believed the nation's survival would depend on women producing large families of racially pure children. This urgency formed the foundation on which the BDM was built. Before the BDM became the official youth organization for girls, there were multiple smaller nationalist groups, including the Deutscher Mädel and the later disbanded Jungmadel organizations. These societies blended Völkisch values, outdoor activities, and loyalty to the German race with a romanticized vision of womanhood. Their members proudly rejected the growing urban modernity and the influence of American fashion, jazz culture, and feminist movements. Instead, they promoted rural ideals, traditional clothing, and the belief that a woman's highest destiny lay in family and service to the community. These pre-existing societies also reflected broader Nazi racial policies. Girls learned from a young age that the value of their lives lay in their ability to maintain racial purity. The teaching of racial science became a core curriculum, with girls instructed to evaluate physical features according to Aryan standards and to avoid friendships or relationships with those deemed racially inferior. These early lessons had profound consequences. They normalized discrimination, encouraged conformity, and laid the psychological groundwork for complicity in the regime's greater crimes. The creation of the BDM cannot be separated from the broader machinery of Nazi propaganda. Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda promoted the image of the ideal German girl in magazines, newsreels, and radio programs. Stories celebrated BDM members who showed exceptional loyalty, athletic ability, or dedication to community service. These narratives created social pressure. Girls who excelled were praised as model citizens, while those who resisted the movement risked being labeled outsiders or even enemies of the state. By the time Hitler consolidated his power in the mid-1930s, the BDM became one of the largest girls' organizations in the world. It was instrumental in shaping the identity of millions of young women, many of whom entered adulthood believing deeply in their role within the Nazi state. The origins of the BDM reveal a complex interplay of ideology, social transformation, and emotional appeal. It was more than a youth group. It was a carefully crafted system designed to mold the next generation of German women into active participants in a totalitarian regime. The League of German Girls, though outwardly presented as a wholesome community for young girls, was internally organized with the precision, hierarchy, and discipline of a paramilitary institution. Its structure was not accidental. It reflected the Nazi regime's broader ambition to standardize, control, and mobilize every aspect of youth life. While boys in the Hitler Youth were groomed for military duty, girls were trained for service, discipline, and ideological loyalty. Understanding the internal mechanics of the League reveals how deeply the regime sought to embed authority and obedience into the daily lives of girls, shaping them into instruments of the state long before they reached adulthood. At the heart of the organization was a meticulously crafted hierarchy designed to mirror the authoritarian structure of the regime itself. The local groups were the foundation, typically organized by neighborhoods or towns. Each small unit, informally known as a group, consisted of a handful of girls who met regularly for instruction, physical training, and community activity. These units acted as the first point of contact between the girls and the ideological machinery of the state. Group leaders, often only slightly older than the girls they supervised, were trained to enforce discipline, maintain daily structure, and deliver lessons in loyalty and identity. Above the local groups were district and regional divisions, each overseen by older teenage leaders or young adult women who had demonstrated both ideological reliability and organizational skill. To rise through these ranks, one had to pass multiple assessments, undergo specialized training courses, and prove the ability to lead others without hesitation. The leadership roles were deeply coveted, not only because they offered status within the organization, but also because they became stepping stones for broader opportunities within the Nazi women's movement. The structure thus created a self-reinforcing cycle of ambition, conformity, and ideological zeal. Training for leaders took place in special camps and academies where the atmosphere more closely resembled a military environment than a youth club. These facilities emphasized discipline, physical fitness, endurance, and the art of commanding others. Girls woke at prescribed hours, marched in formation, participated in strenuous outdoor activities, and engaged in classroom instruction on topics ranging from first aid to racial ideology. While the training was carefully crafted to appear uplifting and inspiring, its deeper purpose was clear: to produce girls who not only obeyed orders, but could also issue them with conviction. The chain of command was strict and enforced daily. Leaders wore specific insignia, badges, and armbands to distinguish their positions. Uniforms played a central role in shaping identity. By removing class distinctions, personal fashion, and individuality, the uniform created a sense of unity, while simultaneously reminding members that they belonged to something greater than themselves. The uniform also enforced discipline. Cleanliness, proper fit, and neat presentation were mandatory. Failure to comply could result in reprimands, suspension from activities, or mandatory corrective tasks. Despite its outward appearance as a girls' organization rooted in wholesome values, the League operated under a militarized system of expectations. Members were required to maintain schedules, participate in drills, attend meetings punctually, and complete assigned tasks with precision. The constant emphasis on obedience, sometimes framed as character building, instilled habits that mirrored the authoritarian culture of the broader regime. The organization functioned as a miniature state, with its own rituals, rules, and rewards. One of the most striking features of the structure was the use of age-based divisions. Young girls, typically between 10 and 13, formed the entry-level groups. Their activities focused on physical play, national songs, simple lessons in heritage, and the beginnings of ideological instruction. Once they turned 14, they entered the main branch, where expectations intensified. Girls at this level engaged in a more demanding program that included long hikes, endurance exercises, community service, and structured ideological lessons. As they neared adulthood, girls who excelled were selected for leadership training or specialized roles within the organization. The internal culture emphasized sisterhood, but it was a sisterhood defined by discipline rather than equality. Older members were encouraged to correct, guide, and supervise younger girls. This created an environment where authority was constantly present, even among peers. Loyalty to the group, to leaders, and ultimately to the nation was reinforced through shared rituals, oath ceremonies, flag gatherings, marches, and celebrations of national holidays. Each ritual served as a reminder that the girls were part of a broader mission, one that transcended personal desires or family ties. The League's leadership courses were particularly significant. These programs were designed to cultivate a model leader, authoritative yet nurturing, disciplined yet enthusiastic, firm yet inspiring. In practice, however, these leaders often became agents of ideological enforcement. They monitored the behavior of the younger girls, reported on dissent or reluctance, and acted as intermediaries between the organization and the home. Many parents found themselves deferring to these young leaders who spoke with the confidence and authority bestowed upon them by the state. Ranks within the organization were not merely symbolic, they carried real power. Leaders controlled schedules, organized events, assigned labor, and evaluated performance. Advancement required loyalty, skill, and unwavering dedication to the ideological foundation of the group. As girls climbed the ranks, they gained access to exclusive opportunities, advanced training camps, leadership seminars, and mentorship by high-ranking women in the Nazi Party. These privileges helped reinforce a sense of belonging and purpose, making it difficult for members to question the system they were part of. Training extended far beyond physical or organizational skills. It also included emotional and psychological conditioning. Girls learned to suppress personal doubts, prioritize group needs, and embrace the collective identity they were given. Leaders taught them to see themselves as guardians of the nation's future, responsible not only for their own behavior but for the moral and ideological purity of the group as a whole. This internalization of responsibility made the structure extraordinarily effective. Education for girls under the Nazi regime was never a neutral or purely academic pursuit. It was a deliberate, systematic attempt to reshape the minds, identities, emotions, and futures of young German girls. While boys were groomed for warfare, leadership, and technical professions, girls were molded into guardians of ideology, transmitters of culture, and future mothers of the so-called New Germany. The educational program that governed their upbringing, both in the classroom and in youth organizations, was infused with political messaging, moral conditioning, and psychological manipulation designed to ensure that every girl grew up with an unwavering sense of duty to the nation. The core principle behind this educational worldview was simple yet profound. Girls were taught not what to think, but how to think. Specifically, how to think in a manner that aligned with state ideology. Schools, youth groups, magazines, films, and community programs all work together to reinforce a uniform worldview. This seamless integration of messaging created an environment in which ideology permeated every aspect of daily life, leaving little room for alternative viewpoints, private dissent, or independent identity formation. Inside classrooms, lessons were reshaped to serve political goals. History textbooks glorified the Germanic past, celebrated legendary heroes, and portrayed the nation's struggles as righteous battles against external enemies. The failures of the Weimar Republic were presented as moral collapse, and the aftermath of the First World War was framed as a national humiliation that required redemption through unity and obedience. Girls learned a sanitized version of world events that cast the nation as a victim of injustice and a beacon of cultural superiority. These narratives were repeated so consistently that many students accepted them as absolute truth. In science classes, the curriculum shifted from genuine biological education to racial instruction. Lessons on genetics, anthropology, and human variation were twisted into simplified theories of racial hierarchy. Girls were taught to evaluate facial features, body shapes, and other physical traits according to a pseudo-scientific classification system that elevated the so-called Aryan ideal. Teachers encouraged students to examine pictures, compare measurements, and draw racial conclusions from what they observed. This form of indoctrination was particularly dangerous because it merged scientific vocabulary with ideological prejudice, giving hateful beliefs the illusion of objective truth. Geography lessons also served ideological purposes. Maps highlighted areas considered historically or culturally connected to the German people, creating a sense of entitlement to territories beyond the nation's borders. Students studied regions portrayed as lost or stolen, subtly preparing them to accept future expansion or annexation as natural and justified. This territorial worldview seeped into how girls perceived the world, not as a diverse landscape of nations and peoples, but as a series of rightful claims and cultural destinies awaiting fulfillment. Physical training for girls under the regime was presented as a joyful celebration of health and vitality, but beneath the surface lay a deeper agenda, shaping bodies and minds to fulfill a future dedicated to service, endurance, and motherhood. Unlike boys who were trained for military readiness, girls were conditioned through a program of athleticism, discipline, and controlled femininity designed to prepare them for their expected role as the biological foundation of the nation. Every exercise, every outdoor activity, and every rule governing their bodies carried symbolic and ideological meaning, creating a physical culture that blended tradition, nationalism, and gendered expectations. From the moment a girl entered youth activities, physical fitness became a constant theme of her daily life. Outdoor exercises, sports, and organized group activities promoted strength, agility, endurance, and resilience. Girls ran cross-country through forests, practiced rhythmic gymnastics, swam in lakes, and hiked across fields in long, coordinated marches. These activities were portrayed as opportunities for camaraderie and adventure, but they also served the state's purpose, preparing millions of girls to become strong, healthy mothers capable of bearing numerous children. The emphasis on physical fitness was grounded in a larger ideological belief that the nation's future depended on biological vitality. Leaders believed that the strength of the nation came not only from military power, but from the health of its population. As a result, girls' physical development was monitored closely. Leaders encouraged proper nutrition, early bedtime routines, outdoor exposure, and clean living. Sports competitions, ranking systems, and fitness evaluations created an environment where physical achievement became a source of pride and, more importantly, a measure of ideological worth. Discipline was inseparable from physical training. Girls learned to follow commands quickly, maintain posture, march in sync, and work as a unified group. These seemingly simple tasks were early lessons in obedience. They taught girls to subordinate personal preferences to the needs of the community, shaping habits that would later be essential to their roles as caregivers, organizers, and ideological supporters. Rituals such as morning assemblies, inspection of uniforms, and synchronized drills reinforced these habits daily. Uniformity played a crucial role in the physical culture. Uniforms flattened class differences and emphasized the importance of unity. They also removed markers of individual fashion, replacing them with a standardized appearance that symbolized purity and simplicity. Hairstyles were kept neat and practical, braids, buns, or shortcuts, reinforcing the idea that girls should appear wholesome, natural, and efficient rather than glamorous or fashionable. Physical training spaces became environments where self-expression faded, replaced by disciplined collective movement. Physical fitness was also deeply connected to the idea of cultivating natural femininity. Girls were encouraged to view their bodies as instruments of future maternity. Strength, stamina, and healthy living were not ends in themselves, but stepping stones toward motherhood. Girls learned that the nation depended on them to produce healthy children, and that physical weakness or poor health represented not only a personal failing, but a threat to the future. This perspective shaped how girls understood gender roles, responsibility, and biological purpose throughout their adolescence. Instruction on preparing for motherhood extended beyond physical training and into moral and emotional conditioning. Girls were taught to embrace modesty, gentleness, compassion, and resilience. Lessons focused on developing empathy, nurturing instincts, and a sense of duty toward family and community. These qualities were framed as natural parts of womanhood, yet they were cultivated deliberately through group discussions, stories, and carefully designed activities. Even recreational programs, crafts, nature excursions, and community service reinforced these themes subtly but consistently. Health education was also a significant component of training. Girls received instruction on hygiene, nutrition, and basic first aid. They learned about household management, childcare, and the rhythms of rural life, often framed through idealized depictions of traditional German womanhood. Lessons emphasized that a future mother must be capable not only of bearing children, but of raising them in a disciplined, healthy, and morally upright environment. In this way, physical training became intertwined with social education, creating a comprehensive model of what an ideal woman should be. Outdoor activities held special importance. Hiking, camping, and nature exploration were presented as opportunities to explore the homeland, develop endurance, and celebrate the natural beauty of the environment. Leaders emphasized that connection to nature strengthened a girl's emotional and spiritual bond with the land. Girls learned songs, stories, and rituals that sacralized the landscape, reinforcing the idea that they were protectors of a cultural and biological heritage rooted in the soil itself. These experiences created powerful emotional memories that bonded girls to the ideology in a deeply personal way. In many regions, physical training also included community-based labor, such as harvesting, gathering wood, or helping with agricultural tasks. These activities were framed as contributions to the nation's well-being, allowing girls to practice endurance, discipline, and selflessness while supporting local communities. The physical challenges of this labor, long hours, repetitive tasks, and exposure to the elements, were presented as character-building experiences that strengthened both body and spirit. Despite the focus on traditional femininity, training programs discouraged weakness, fragility, or excessive delicacy. Leaders praised courage, determination, and perseverance, urging girls to push beyond discomfort. Slogans and chants encouraged them to view hardship as a path to inner strength. The model girl was expected to be physically robust, emotionally steady, and ideologically committed, not a passive figure, but an active contributor to the nation's future. This blend of strength and submission defined the complex gender identity crafted for them. The physical culture also enforced moral discipline. Leaders monitored friendships, behavior, and personal conduct, ensuring that girls avoided unhealthy influences such as smoking, drinking, provocative fashion, or relationships with boys deemed inappropriate. Purity, physical, moral, and racial, was emphasized as essential to their future roles. This moral oversight blended seamlessly with physical training, reinforcing a worldview where the body became a site of ideological purity and responsibility. By the time girls completed their youth training, the combination of athleticism, discipline, and ideological messaging had shaped them into individuals who saw motherhood not as one option among many, but as their primary contribution to society. Their physical fitness, emotional conditioning, and training in endurance prepared them for the challenges of childbirth, family life, and future responsibilities. The organization had succeeded in creating a generation of young women who viewed themselves through the lens of national duty. This chapter explores the expansive system of community service, agricultural labor, and civic duty that defined the organization's role in the larger ideological project of the regime. From the earliest years, service was framed not as optional work, but as a core expectation, a visible demonstration of loyalty, and a means of transforming young girls into disciplined contributors to national goals. Rural Germany, in particular, became a stage on which the regime projected its beliefs about purity, strength, and the value of hard physical labor. Through involvement in seasonal farm work, public service campaigns, and localized welfare initiatives, members were embedded directly into the daily functioning of communities across the country. One of the most important service programs involved agricultural labor, often referred to as seasonal farm assignments. These deployments served a dual purpose. They addressed critical labor shortages in rural regions and immersed young members in an environment idealized by the regime. City-born girls were introduced to manual tasks such as harvesting, tending to livestock, planting crops, and assisting farmers during peak seasons. The workdays were long and physically demanding, offering little rest and even less comfort, yet they were portrayed as spiritually uplifting. Through slogans emphasizing the importance of soil, heritage, and national renewal, the program suggested that farm work connected girls to the authentic spirit of the nation. Supervision ensured that discipline never faltered, and detailed evaluations often followed each assignment. In addition to agricultural deployments, community service played a critical role in shaping how the organization interacted with broader society. Members were dispatched to support local welfare offices, collect donations of clothing and food, assist in charitable drives, and help organize public events. These activities allowed the regime to visibly display unity, order, and moral dedication. Girls might gather firewood for elderly villagers, distribute supplies during winter months, or participate in hygiene campaigns aimed at improving public health. Behind these tasks lay a carefully constructed message. Service was not simply a charitable act, but a civic responsibility tied directly to ideals of national loyalty and collective strength. Another significant component of service involved the cultivation of a public image centered on obedience, helpfulness, and disciplined presence. The organization did not merely assign tasks, it trained girls to perform them with a specific demeanor, emphasizing politeness, precision, and unwavering enthusiasm. Whether they were organizing local festivals or participating in public parades, members were instructed to project an image of youthful vitality that reinforced state propaganda. The visibility of this disciplined service shaped how communities perceived young girls' roles within the national project and helped normalize the regime's expectations within everyday life. Rural placements also served as a form of social engineering. Living with host families or in organized quarters, girls were removed from the influences of urban life, peer groups, and private family dynamics. This allowed supervisors and local leaders to exert stronger control over their routines, beliefs, and behavior. Days were tightly scheduled, beginning with early morning duties and ending with evening group activities such as singing, discussions, or ideological study sessions. The regime viewed rural service not only as practical labor, but as an opportunity to mold character and reinforce a sense of duty that transcended personal discomfort or individual preference. The expectation of national duty extended into the realm of emergency response and crisis management. During harsh winters, natural disasters, or periods of heightened economic strain, members were mobilized to distribute relief supplies, assist hospitals, or help coordinate local support systems. These responsibilities introduced girls to environments where resource scarcity, illness, and vulnerability were visible. The organization framed these encounters as lessons in strength and resilience, teaching young girls to prioritize collective needs over personal ones. Leadership emphasized that moments of crisis revealed the true value of disciplined service. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, the service programs expanded significantly as the national situation grew more strained. Agricultural shortages, escalating demands on rural communities, and shifting social structures placed increasing pressure on young girls to shoulder responsibilities once held by adults. Their participation became essential to maintaining food production and supporting local infrastructures. While the regime continued to portray this work as noble and fulfilling, the reality for many girls involved fatigue, hardship, and emotional strain. Yet the structure of the program left little room for dissent, and public recognition often masked the burdens placed on these young workers. Through all forms of service, farm labor, welfare work, civic engagement, and emergency response, the organization constructed a vision of young womanhood defined by discipline, self-sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. These expectations shaped the lives of countless girls, influencing their physical routines, social interactions, and sense of identity. Community service was not presented as a temporary obligation, but as a lifelong model of behavior that aligned with the broader national ideology. By embedding service into the very fabric of daily life, the organization reinforced a worldview that placed duty and obedience at the center of personal development. As the war expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations, the role of girls' organizations grew dramatically, reshaping responsibilities, expectations, and the daily lives of young members across the nation. What had once been a movement focused primarily on disciplined upbringing, community work, and structured education now became a mobilized force supporting the wartime state. The transition was rapid and far-reaching. The needs of the nation overtook earlier ideals, and girls found themselves participating in tasks once reserved for adults. This chapter examines the widening scope of their involvement, the pressures placed upon them, and the ways in which war redefined what it meant to serve. The early years of mobilization introduced new categories of labor. As men were drafted into the military and women were increasingly assigned to industrial or administrative work, gaps emerged throughout the home front. These gaps were quickly filled by young girls who were encouraged, often expected, to step into essential roles. They tended to transportation hubs, supported logistics networks, helped coordinate supply drives, and served in medical support positions. Their presence became common in local government offices, postal services, rationing centers, and civil defense programs. The organization that once focused on personal development was now deeply intertwined with wartime administration. One of the most significant changes involved auxiliary support for medical and emergency services. Many girls received training in basic first aid, nursing routines, and hospital preparedness. They were dispatched to assist in convalescent homes, care centers, and emergency clinics that struggled to handle rising demands. Wartime injuries, refugee flows, and shortages of trained staff turned these centers into overburdened institutions. Young girls, some barely into their teens, found themselves changing bandages, preparing supplies, and providing comfort to injured civilians and soldiers alike. The emotional weight of this work was immense, yet it was framed as an honor and a duty. Air raid preparation became another defining element of wartime mobilization. Cities across the country faced increasing bombardment, and the responsibility for readiness extended well beyond official services. Girls were trained to guide civilians into shelters, check blackout compliance, distribute emergency materials, and support evacuation efforts. In heavily targeted regions, their tasks included organizing child evacuations, assisting in relocation centers, and helping reunite displaced families. The fear, chaos, and unpredictability of air raids turned these roles into some of the most stressful responsibilities they would ever experience. As wartime shortages intensified, the agricultural responsibilities that had existed before the war expanded exponentially. Fields were increasingly maintained by the youngest members of society, who were sent on extended deployments lasting weeks or months. This was no longer framed as educational or character-building work. It became a critical component of national survival. They performed strenuous labor, long days of harvesting, milking, carrying supplies, managing livestock, and supporting rural households that had lost much of their adult workforce. The physical exhaustion was accompanied by a sense of urgency, as crop failures or delays could result in rations tightening even further for millions. Mobilization also extended into industry, particularly in areas requiring lighter precision tasks. Although younger girls were generally excluded from heavy factory labor, many were trained to assist with sorting materials, packaging equipment, operating basic machinery, and maintaining supply inventories. Their contributions supported the broader war effort indirectly, yet significantly. In some areas, they participated in assembling communication components, preparing textile shipments, or aiding local workshops that produced essential goods. These responsibilities blurred the boundaries between youth service and industrial labor. Wartime propaganda intensified pressure on young girls to embrace these expanded roles without hesitation. Posters, magazines, radio broadcasts, and school lessons emphasized that every capable person had a part to play in defending the nation. The language of sacrifice, endurance, and unity shaped the messaging, reinforcing the idea that girls were indispensable to maintaining the home front. Public ceremonies praised their work, turning participation into a visible symbol of patriotic devotion. At the same time, these celebrations masked the fatigue, trauma, and emotional turmoil that many experienced beneath the surface. Supervisors and leaders enforced strict discipline to ensure that wartime tasks were carried out efficiently. Schedules became rigid and demanding, with days structured around work shifts, training sessions, and ideological briefings. The environment left little room for personal life or emotional expression. Girls were expected to remain composed, enthusiastic, and dedicated, even when confronted with devastating losses, destroyed homes, or the disappearance of family members. Mobilization was not only physical, but psychological, conditioning them to prioritize duty above all else. The war also altered the social dynamics within the organization. Increased responsibility created a hierarchy shaped not only by age or rank, but by practical competence. Girls who demonstrated reliability, leadership skills, or emotional resilience were often placed in supervisory roles over their peers. This created an environment where authority could shift rapidly, placing significant strain on relationships. The need for order, productivity, and discipline sometimes overshadowed camaraderie, transforming the internal culture of the group. As the conflict dragged on and conditions worsened, the demands placed on young girls became heavier. Bombings intensified, shortages deepened, and communities faced increasing instability. In the final years of the war, some were mobilized for tasks that bordered on dangerous or overwhelming, including clearing rubble, assisting bomb damage assessment teams, and supporting overcrowded hospitals. The emotional impact of witnessing widespread destruction, combined with the pressure to continue serving without complaint, left lasting scars. This chapter highlights the profound transformation of girls' roles during the war. Mobilization reshaped their daily routines, responsibilities, and identities. What began as a youth organization designed to instill discipline and national loyalty evolved into an essential component of wartime infrastructure. Their participation in agriculture, medical support, emergency response, administration, and logistical operations reveals the immense burden placed on young shoulders. Through their labor, the nation sustained itself. Through their endurance, the home front continued to function. Yet the cost, physical, emotional, and psychological, was heavy and deeply felt. The final phase of the war brought an abrupt and traumatic end to the structured world that had shaped so many young girls' identities and daily routines. As the war turned decisively against the nation, the stability, discipline, and sense of purpose that had defined their earlier years dissolved into chaos. This chapter explores the collapse of these organizations, the experiences of girls during the final months of the conflict, and the complex and often painful aftermath that followed. It also examines the long-term legacy of this system and how its influence persisted, sometimes silently, long after its formal dissolution. The decline began gradually, driven by mounting military defeats and increasing pressure on the home front. Air raids intensified, cities were reduced to rubble, and administrative systems began to fail under the strain of shortages and destruction. Communication networks fractured, leadership structures weakened, and local units struggled to maintain order. As transportation routes were cut off and communities became isolated, the once well-organized programs could no longer function as intended. Schedules collapsed, assignments became irregular, and the sense of routine that had defined daily life slipped away. During these final months, many girls found themselves thrust into situations far beyond anything they had been trained for. Their roles shifted from structured service to improvised survival. Displaced families flooded rural areas, emergency shelters overflowed, and medical centers were overwhelmed. Young girls often stepped in to provide care, distribute supplies, or help locate missing relatives. Yet these acts took place amid growing uncertainty, with resources dwindling and fear spreading through towns and villages. As front lines encroached closer, evacuation became one of their most urgent tasks. Trains and convoys transported children, the elderly, and refugees away from advancing armies, while girls served as escorts, assistants, or organizers. These journeys were perilous. Bombings, derailments, and sudden military encounters were constant threats. Some girls were separated from their families during these chaotic movements, forced to navigate unfamiliar regions with little guidance. The upheaval marked a stark contrast to the ordered world they once knew. In many regions, the collapse of central authority created a vacuum in which local leaders attempted to maintain discipline, sometimes resorting to strict measures despite the deteriorating situation. Girls were expected to continue serving even as their communities fell apart. They helped dig trenches, clear debris, assist communication posts, or support makeshift hospitals. Some were present during catastrophic bombings, witnessing destruction on a scale that left deep emotional scars. The line between service and survival blurred entirely. The arrival of Allied forces marked the definitive end of the organization. In some areas, uniforms were hastily discarded or hidden, as association with the old system could lead to suspicion or punitive measures. Girls who had once been encouraged to take pride in their participation suddenly faced the need to distance themselves from it. Fear, confusion, and uncertainty dominated this transitional period. Many were unsure how much responsibility they bore for their involvement, especially since many had joined at a young age with little understanding of broader political realities. Post-war authorities initiated denazification processes that scrutinized participation in state-run youth programs. Although most girls were classified as followers rather than active ideological participants, the stigma persisted. Many struggled with feelings of guilt, shame, or betrayal as they reflected on how deeply they had believed in ideals that were now condemned. Others grappled with the loss of identity, structure, and purpose that had once guided their lives. The abrupt end of the organization left a void that was difficult to fill, particularly for those who had spent their formative years within its rigid framework. The social aftermath was equally complex. Communities faced shortages, displacement, and widespread devastation. Rebuilding required labor, resilience, and emotional endurance. Girls who had been shaped by years of disciplined service were suddenly confronted with a world stripped of certainty. Some redirected their skills into post-war relief efforts, helping reconstruct schools, assist humanitarian programs, or support families struggling to survive. Others withdrew, attempting to rebuild their personal lives while processing traumatic memories of war and collapse. The legacy of these organizations endured in subtle and sometimes troubling ways. For many, the years of structured service left lasting habits of obedience, discipline, and self-sacrifice, qualities that persisted long after the war. Others carried the emotional burden of having participated in a system designed to shape young minds for ideological purposes. Reflecting on these experiences became a lifelong process, shaped by evolving cultural memory, public discourse, and personal introspection. In the decades that followed, scholarship and public discussion gradually expanded, allowing former members to share their experiences more openly. Some spoke of camaraderie, friendship, and belonging. Others reflected on manipulation, pressure, and lost innocence. These varied memories highlighted the complexity of their involvement. They had been children shaped by forces far beyond their control, yet they had participated in a system that profoundly influenced national history. The collapse of the organization marked not just the end of a youth structure, but the end of an era defined by control, ideology, and demands placed upon the youngest members of society. Chapter 7 therefore concludes by recognizing the dual legacy of these experiences, the resilience of those who survived and rebuilt their lives, and the lasting reminder of how deeply state power can shape the identities and futures of its youth.